I practice teaching, I practice research, and I practice theory. The readings, actually, in particular, the article for this week, is going to, I think, challenge you, us, me, um, to really ask whether those should be three different sentences and even whether they should be three different clauses. What I mean by that is that I think the article you read for today, and perhaps chapter 11 of the text as well, really challenges us to consider whether to say that I practice research and I practice theory is really the same thing as saying I practice teaching. In other words, they argue that we really shouldn't be separating those things at all, that they really can be thought of as one and the same. Um, I think that's also a debatable point, but it's something that I think would be helpful for us to think about in this unit. Um, with that in mind, actually thinking about those statements and whether they should be separate or considered in as one assemblage or one group of stuff, prompted me to think about, why I even went into teaching in the first place. And this is actually consistent with what you'll read about in chapter 11, which is really looking at one teacher's development over time. So, a lot of people, and when I ask my teacher candidates, why teaching? Why do you want to be a teacher? One very common response is that, oh, I love children. I love working with children. And I do too. And, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not like I don't like children. But I guess I want to think a little bit deeper than that. So when I think about why I enjoy working with children, I've realized it's really because I'm fascinated by the processes of human learning and how people, not just children, come to know things. As I explored that and tried to do what I could to facilitate learning as a classroom teacher, and I guess I still try to do that. I'm still a teacher, just at a different level. I also became very fascinated by the kinds of social and political affordances and constraints on human learning. So really thinking about teaching and learning as social and cultural processes, and what are the processes that impact human learning. And so, what's really interesting is in the article you're going to read, they really talk about how professionals in other fields talk about their work. So, for example, a lawyer might say, I practice law, right? A doctor might say, I practice medicine, or what have you. We often don't use that phrase as teachers. And I have a friend of mine who's an astrophysicist. He's a professor at the U of I. And I was talking with this about him, and he said, yeah, it's not like people go into astronomy because they like planets or they like stars. They may very well like those things, but it's the deeper processes involved in them that really floats their boat. And so I think that's something for us to consider as teachers. I think that it's also, I think that considering those things can really help us think about how over the process of our careers, we have changed or seek to continue to change. So let me just talk very briefly about an area in which I have changed in terms of my practice and also my theoretical understandings. I guess for a long time I've embraced critical frames. For teaching and learning. I think I started to take that on actually before I was a classroom teacher, but when I worked as a migrant aide back in the early 90s. And so when I went into teaching, that was sort of already at the forefront of my brain, critical literacy and things like that. What I don't think I did at the time was really questioned race the way I do now. I think that I was very cognizant of being in the dominant majority racially. But I don't think I took a very race-conscious approach to my processes of inquiry, whether that's as a classroom teacher, as a researcher, or both. And it's something that I've come to over the years, but that I think is an ongoing process, and that I'm still coming to. Um, so one example of that is just as a researcher, when I'm inquiring about things, when I'm reading people's work and citing things, I'm reminding myself that when I am citing sources, for example, when I'm citing research, that it's really easy to only cite white people. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but if you think about if you think about the researchers whose work is really taken up in a big way in the field, and who constantly get the citations and the citations so that their work becomes even more known, um, those, with some exceptions, are mostly white people. And I think that that's something that we need to question. Why is that, right? So here's an example. So um, I've been writing something that alludes to democracy and voice and equity in education. And when we think about democracy in education, John Dewey is one of the people who researchers go to first, right? He's like the guy, right? What's really interesting, and what was brought to my awareness, actually when I was a little bit before I taught Teach, what was that, 576, which I know a couple of you have taken. It's contemporary curriculum theories. Anyway, prior to teaching that class, I had done a lot more reading on that and became familiar of the work of Anna Julia Cooper, whose work was at the turn of the last century, an African American female scholar whose work is essential to understandings of voice, democracy, and equity. And yet, and there are lots of overlaps with more recent scholars, including John Dewey and her work. And yet, John Dewey is the one that keeps getting cited, which is something that I think we need to question. So one of the things I am trying to make a concerted effort to do in my own work, and I actually try to make an effort in the book to do this. I don't know if I really succeeded to the degree that I should have, but is to really ask, am I perpetuating inequities by going to the scholars who we always go to, such as Dewey? Or am I making an effort to look and see whose work has been glossed over because they maybe in earlier times their work was more explicitly squelched, right? As was the case with Anna Julia Cooper. So I'm just trying to take more of an awareness of race and racial inequities, and my own whiteness and privilege in my research and my teaching. I'll briefly talk about one other way in which I've been doing that in my research and teaching. So I'm currently engaged in a new research project with some of Patricia Valente's kids and with some of my own teacher candidates. And we have been exploring the notion of critical care and emotion, and how delving into issues of really intense emotional events in our lives as teachers might support us in better attuning our teaching to the strengths and unique experiences of historically marginalized children. In particular, helping us attend to and recognize their funds of knowledge and ways of viewing the world. So one of the things that I did is I asked my teacher candidates to write about a felt moment in their lives. And by felt moment, I meant a really intense emotional experience. And I modeled that by writing about my own experiences undergoing cancer treatment, both positive and negative. And one of the interesting things that I've realized through this process in continuing to read and doing this work is that and this goes along with critical race theory. So I guess one way of reading all of what I'm talking about in terms of my own theoretical change over time is saying that I've sort of come to critical race theory. But one of the things that critical race theory does is it asks us to consider our own privilege. And so what's been really interesting is that I've come to realize that my own experiences as a cancer patient and as a cancer survivor are can't be untangled from privilege. So, for example, my access to healthcare, right? My my ability to talk about the treatments in ways that are humanizing beyond just the color of my skin or my gender or sexual orientation, etc. The fact that my father is a doctor. And so, by virtue of that and that privileged socioeconomic position, I have had a lot of access to high quality healthcare beyond just having insurance. So those are just some of the ways that those are some of the things that impacted my survival, right? And my ability to be here talking with you now. And although that might be considered as a trauma narrative, my experience is also a narrative of privilege, right? And that's something that I'm coming to recognize. And so in my research, I'm realizing that as I ask teacher candidates to talk about their own felt moments or really intense moments of either pain or joy or both, that just by virtue of getting in touch with our emotions and thinking about perhaps traumatic or intense experiences we've had is not enough to help us really consider the kinds of experiences that may be very different from ours that children from racialized groups or other historically marginalized communities may face. So anyway, that's something that I'm continuing to learn about as I go. I would be really interested in hearing from some of you all about how your professional development has occurred and how that may be linked to theories of reading and literacy. Anyway, I think I'm going to leave it at that. I hope that you enjoy this unit. Again, you're going to find that similar to Unit 6, the readings are minimal. In fact, even more minimal than I think they were last week or in the last unit. So, and that's obviously because you are finalizing your instance of practice paper and you are in the midst of reading your seminal or acclaimed book. It seems that at this point, I still have yet to hear back from one group, but it looks like all, if not all except one group, are going to be conferencing with me on Thursday the 26th via Zoom. The nature of that conference will be, part of it is just going to be me kind of listening in and able to participate in the kinds of discussions that you guys might have around your text. You're engaging in forums or some kind of group discussion space as a group around what you're reading, but you can consider this conference as an opportunity to have sort of some face-to-face conversation time that I might be able to participate in as well. In addition, that can be a time that I can help you think in more specific ways or clarify for you how you might go about presenting the topic of your seminal or acclaimed book to the remainder of the class. So that'll be the purpose. I've scheduled each of those conferences for about 45 minutes. So that's the idea with that. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns about that. I'll look forward to seeing you all in your groups. And as always, please let me know if you have any questions or concerns at all about this unit or the assignments.